Welcome to Your College Bound Kid,
Podcast for parents and families everywhere.
Whether you have kids that plan to attend college or you have current college students, you want them in and you want them to graduate.
You want a quality education that will give you a skill set that will make you marketable for the jobs of today and the jobs of tomorrow. I am Mark Stucker, and I'm a college coach from Metro Atlanta.
And I am Anika Madden, and I am a parent, also from Atlanta, currently in North Carolina.
And I'm David Williams, and I'm a dad from Chicago, Illinois. This week in the news, a bombshell article by Scott Jasek from Inside Higher Education. The University of California Board of Trustees votes down the ACT and the SAT. Our book chapter by Mark and Anika is, What is the PLUS loan? Our question from a listener comes from Facebook, and that's any advice for juniors on activities they can do this summer to stand out on their college admissions. Our interview is part 2 with Carmen Chavez, our high school student in Miami, Florida, on what I did right and what I would do differently on my college admission process. And our college spotlight, now that Mark's laptop has been retrieved, is UMass Amherst. Take it away, Mark.
Good one. Friends, the picture is becoming clearer as almost all schools will now have some residential component in the fall. But there are many, many different twists, and multiple schools announced this week what their plan would be. So here's just a few of them. Notre Dame announced the students will begin their semester 2 weeks earlier on August 10th, skip their fall break, and then leave for Thanksgiving break and then return in January, minimizing travel. University of South Carolina announced a very similar plan as well. UT Austin had a different twist on their plan, similar to Notre Dame and South Carolina. Students will be on campus until Thanksgiving and will not return to January, minimizing travel, but they will do the final part of the semester online at home and complete exams online at home. And I expect actually quite a few schools to mimic one of those two plans. But we're just seeing a lot of different plans out here. Ithaca College is delaying their start until October 5th. And then we have a lot of creative things out here, like Wittenberg in Ohio, who's giving everybody a single for social distancing, but charging the same price as a double. And then we have Denison, who's created a whole quarantine dorm area. So that if somebody does contract COVID, they've got a designated place within the college where they can go. So a lot of different programs out there. For our admissions tip, when a college asks you what major you are interested in, or they ask you to rank your top majors, you can rest assured that the major you select will have some significant influence on their admissions decision. It's a tell that college major is correlated to admission acceptance rates. And for admissions vernacular, I'm going to get you on this one, Dave.
All
the
right.
word is rap.
The word is what? Rap?
Rap, R-A-P.
Oh, that's got to be.
And don't try to break out with some MC Hammer or some old stuff. Cool in the Gang. Not Cool in the Gang. LL Cool J or something, man.
I was going to say an urban art form devoid of any music particulars. But no.
Look at you, man. You sound like a dictionary writer.
That's right.
So a RAP is an acronym for a residential academic program.
Oh, wow.
Very similar to an LLC, a learning living community, but with an academic focus. So this is for students who all have a similar academic interest. Let's say you got a bunch of students in a pre-vet program. They all live together in the same area. Usually it is accompanied by at least one class in the dorm with all those students. So it's a way to help people transition into the college, meeting people, what I call finding their tribe. So, and I had to get the word rap in. I had it actually on for episode 140, and then it's going to come up today in UMass Amherst, so it's going to blow my cover on me, so I had to move it up. And before we dive into the article today, Dave, I did want to just add just a little bit of clarification to our legacy conversation that we had last week. You remember you and I had a robust conversation about legacy admissions?
We did.
And one thing I realized after we got off, that we never actually defined legacy. And I know people will think, well, you don't need to define legacy. Legacy is when your parents go to the college and they graduate. But in reality, there are at least 3 other different definitions of legacy that different colleges have. Some places consider you a legacy if one of your parents went to the college, even if they didn't graduate. Not many in that category, but there are a few. Some consider you a legacy if your parents went to grad school or professional school, where some only regard you as a legacy if you go for undergrad. And some schools regard you as a legacy if your grandparents went. So I just wanted to kind of throw that out there just to add some clarification. And Dave, I want to resume my conversation with you, just not on this podcast, about our big legacy debate. Yeah. So I'm going to ask if you and I can take that up with additional content for our donors, because I've been thinking all week. And I'm like, I had some good points I never got in there. So we'll see if we can pick that up for our main content.
Yes, I think there was some nuance that we can add to that, but for bonus content, that would be fantastic.
Sounds great.
Let's turn to college hot topics in the news.
So, take it away, my friend. We got a lot to talk about. Some bombshell news articles came out this week.
They did. And this one was not entirely unexpected, but it does rate up as to one of the newer bombshells. It merited kicking off the other article that we were going to discuss this week. And it's an article by
We're going to get to that article. I'm dying to get to it.
We are. And in fact, this was such a major article that, my daughter emailed it to you, emailed it to me just after you emailed it to me. And it was one of 3 articles that we were considering. And that is that the University of California Board of Regents voted to discontinue using the SAT and ACT in its admissions. And it's by Scott Jasek. So the particulars are the UC Regents voted 23-0, so it was unanimous, to approve Janet Napolitano's, the chancellor's plan, to phase out the SAT and ACT over 5 years, to be replaced if, and that's a big if, the new test is necessary, by a new test developed by the faculty of the University of California system. And the reason, the big why, is it's an effort to promote equity. And they pointed a couple things. First of all, why is this so huge? California is the single largest market for undergraduate admission exams. And the reality is that most people believe that many other schools will at least partially follow California's leads, and at least considering the ACT and the SAT to be test optional as part of their admission process. So you ask, how big is the test admission business? Well, the annual revenues for the ACT exceeds $1 billion. And
the SAT, Dave, that's the College Board.
The College Board
brings in more than $1 billion.
That's right. And then who runs the ACT? The ACT
the ACT.
Yeah, the ACT, that's over $350 million. So needless to say, those folks were not happy about this decision. But this was the reasoning behind this decision. The College Board said, quote, regardless of what happens, our mission remains the same, to get all students, especially low income and first generation, opportunities to show their strength. We must address the discrepancies in coursework and classrooms that evidence shows most often attributes to an inequity in California. So this is the Napolitano plan. First of all, in the next 2 years, 2021 and 2022, the SATs are going to be, and the ACTs are going to be test optional. In 2023 and 2024, for California state residents, they will go to be test blind. So they will not consider that test at all for Cal State residents. For out-of-state residents, they will still have the option of submitting the ACT or the SAT. And the other twist to it, that in terms of for merit awards and scholarships, they will allow all applicants to submit their SATs and ACTs if they want to be considered for specific merit awards. However, by 2025, Janet Napolitano says she wants a new admission test. That test will be a creation of the UC faculty. They don't know what type of test it's going to be, how they're going to do it. There's been some estimates that it could cost $100 million, but Napolitano disputed that. But she also had this caveat that if by 2025 they cannot come up with an appropriate substitute test, then by that time, the whole system will go completely test blind. So let me stop there, Mark, and get your input.
First of all, that was a fantastic summary. Literally, because there's so many different nuances to her plan. It's quite complex. In fact, the only thing that I didn't hear you say is, the UCs have required the writing portion of the test. They're literally almost the only ones out here requiring the writing portion of the test. And so one of the things she said is that for those who do submit the test, the writing portion will no longer be required. But that's other than that, you kind of summarized it well. So there's a lot of places I want to go with this. We've talked a lot about test scores a lot. Did a whole segment with the emergency podcast when Chicago went test optional. Did a huge segment with Anika probably 5 weeks ago where I predicted that the test would never be the same when all these schools were going to either 1 year, 3 years, or permanently optional. And I said then the big test will be, what do the UCs do? Do they renew the 1 year and go test optional or not? So there's some interesting history with the UCs and the test. First of all, let's just reiterate. I said this many episodes ago, but I know not everybody hears every episode. So the 6 universities in the country that get the most applications are not Stanford, MIT, Princeton, Harvard, Yale, Columbia, Penn, and those schools. They are 6 UCs. The numbers 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6 are all UCs. You've got UC Santa Barbara, UCSD, which is San Diego. You've got Irvine, Davis, and then Berkeley and LA, Los Angeles, UCLA. Those 6 schools get the most applications every year.
And Santa Cruz,
so that's
right?
One thing. Well, I'm sorry, what'd you say?
Is Santa Cruz there? UC Santa Cruz?
Not so. There's 10 UCs, but the 6 that get the most applications are those 6.
Okay.
All right. So that's one thing. The other thing that's interesting to note is the interesting history that the UCs have with the SAT. So even that the SAT was birthed in 1926, it really took off and got its validity 50 years ago when the UCs embraced it as the test they would use. That's when it really skyrocketed. And there's been over a 20-year time frame now where the leadership of the UCs have been displeased with the test. This goes back actually more than 20 years. It goes back to the late 90s. And for those of you who remember, the SAT for the longest time was out of 1,600 points. Yep. Even in the dinosaur age when Dave and I were taking it, it was a 1,600-point test. And then from 2005 to 2016, it became a 2,400-point test. Now, what people don't know, what was it that led it to be a 2,400-point test? Well, it was largely the result of Atkinson, who was in a leadership role at the UCs at that time. And basically what he said was not use your test unless you address writing. So then the College Board went back and added a whole 800-point section just to keep the UCs on board with the test. That's how much power they have. Right. And so the reason why this is so important and why it's such a powerful move, it's very similar to last week when I gave the 14 or maybe it was 15 reasons now, I can't remember if it was 14 or 15, why admissions is going to be so different for juniors than it was for seniors. At the heart of almost every one of the reasons I gave was the financial tumultuous situation that colleges were in and how they were going to have to rearrange their admission strategies in lieu of the financial challenges they have. Well, how does that relate to the test you're thinking? Where are you going with this, Tucker? Well, this is a buyer's market right now. There's a dearth of students, less students applying. Now we're going to have a harder time for international students getting visas. More and more people are concerned about the cost of college. And we have the birth dearth going on. And then we have the growth of all the other competitors, such as online education, 2-year programs, certificates, badges, and all of that. So it is a struggle right now for students. And it's going to be very, very, very difficult for schools that compete with the UCs, and quite frankly, even ones that don't necessarily have the cachet and prestige that the UCs have, especially, the most selective of them, which is quite a few. It's not just Berkeley and UCLA. Like, more than half of those UCs have gotten extremely hard to get into. So it's going to be very difficult for schools to justify why they are requiring a test that schools that are more selective and more prestigious than they are don't require. In other words, it's already hard. I can tell you from having done admissions, it's very, very hard competing against prestige. It's just very hard. You can try all the things you want. You can try showing love and being warm and friendly and have people meet all the right people. And sometimes you win doing that, but it's hard. And so, people are going to be saying, why are you requiring the test when UCLA and Berkeley and Santa Barbara and San Diego and Irvine and Davis and everybody else doesn't require it? And because it's such a battle for students right now, colleges are going to want to remove any possible barrier they can to keep them from having access to students. Does that make any sense, Dave, or not?
It definitely does. It definitely does. But of course, the other big issue I think that they pointed out, and the real driver of this in this article, was that the fact is that the tests are markers of socioeconomic status. It's not a marker of innate ability or academic achievement. And the reason why I think the tests are going to eventually go away is because no design test, even by the UC Berkeley faculty, is going to get rid of the fact that people with access to all the resources can always give their kids a better opportunity to gain a test. And it's not a reflection of the academic achievement that we see in the grades and the character that's reflective thereof.
I'm glad you transitioned to that, Dave, because there's kind of two different conversations. There's what impact will this have on the declension of this test being implemented across the country? That's the point I addressed at first.
Yeah.
There's another major point in here, which you're addressing now, which is what was the reason why they made this decision?
Right.
And will they be able to come up with an alternative to address the condition that they identified as the problem? And I do contend that's going to be very, very, very difficult. Now, here's the reality. All of these schools, they all know of kids that are in their school that are not great test takers that did amazing. One of the things I like to ask admissions people sometimes is, like, what's the lowest test score that you've ever seen a kid have where they've come in and done really, really well? And sometimes people will tell me these incredible stories. So remember, a lot of times, like for transfer admissions, you don't have to reveal your test scores, and the kid will come in, transfer, just crush it, become a Fulbright. Like in one case, I won't mention the school, but it was an incredibly rigorous, demanding, prestigious school. And when I asked the question, I got told what a particular student's test scores were. And this person not only went on to get a Fulbright, but is chair of the department at the school right now. So they all have these stories. So that makes them a little leery about the test. But at the same time, they also know that there is some aspect, some predictive component to the test. There is research that shows that test scores plus GPA is a better predictor in and of itself than just GPA. And so that's why this is so highly controversial. But schools want the ability to shape their own class. But one of the mistakes I think that was made in this, if I could say so, in this decision, is almost all of it was put in the context of how it's hurting underrepresented students of color and lower socioeconomic status students of color. It was all put in that context. When in reality, there's a lot of other problems that people have with the test. They don't like the money-making machine that the College Board is and how it's bilking kids out of money. And while this never came out here, there's no doubt in my mind that there's somebody that's thinking, if we're going to have a test, why don't we generate the money and have it fund our own system? Maybe I'm being cynical there. Maybe they'll make it free. Maybe I'm wrong and they'll make it free. But I could see them having a $20 or $25 test, or maybe they'll make it free for California and they won't for people outside of California, and they'll generate money. But I do not think they're going to be able to come up with a test that is not going to have that's not going to have some of the discrepancies and disparity, because there's just way too many advantages. If your parents are educated, and if your parents are wealthy, and if they value education, and so they inculcate that into you and all the values that come with that, whether it's reading to you at a young age, or travel, or exposure, or having educated people in your home or you're exposed to, and then they put you in the best schools for 15, 16 years, whether they're private boarding day or suburban, you're going to end up with disparity when you have testing. Thoughts, Dave?
Well, yes, I want to dovetail on two things. Number one, you are right that there were other issues besides just the impact on lower socioeconomic students. And one of the articles that we did not highlight pointed out that the AP tried to rule out its tests online this year, and apparently it was somewhat of a mitigated disaster.
There's some lawsuits going on right now.
That's correct. There was difficulties for people trying to upload the test. There was some questions about the proctoring. It became evidently clear that they do not have measures in place to prevent cheating. And more importantly, it exacerbated the wealth divide, because kids that did not have high-speed internet access were clearly at a disadvantage when trying to transition so quickly to a test online. And the realities of the COVID virus is that it's very unlikely that we're going to be able to have significant fall and winter testing next year, unless we have an online option because of the social distancing requirements. So that was number one. But number two is I actually went back and listened to aspects of an excellent interview you had with Idan Shahar. And I think he really addressed this brilliantly when he said that the real issue is that you have selective colleges that everybody wants to get into, and that whatever is the criteria that is used to get into those colleges, people will try and game that by throwing an inordinate amount of money and resources at that test or hurdle, and that it's going to be inevitably still be reflected in the inequities. Who can afford the $10,000 tutors to ace this test versus the poor kid that can't? So the issue is the test itself, the concept of the test.
Yeah, and so I think there's a couple of things, as we reflect on this article. One is, how will it change college admissions?
Yeah.
And one of the things I want to reiterate is, I have to say this is so funny. I was doing a session, a consultation session with a podcast family that listens regularly, and I brought up the test, and they said, "You told me, test optional is not test blind." Nothing like getting quoted your own stuff right back at you, Dave. It's awesome. But I want to reiterate that, because I think if people think this means that the test will not have any import, will not have any significance, you can actually see proof of that right in the own contorted policy. Right. Even Cal residents can still use it for scholarship money.
Correct.
And out-of-state students can still submit it. So one thing I will say about this, I really wish that they would have, the whole KISS adage, Dave, keep it simple, stupid. Or is it keep it stupid, simple? Keep it simple, stupid. One of them.
Keep it simple, stupid. That's right.
Is that okay? I wish they would have simplified it. This thing is complicated. You go test optional for 2 years. Okay. Not necessarily. Then you go test blind. And but you're test blind for California residents, not for non-California residents, but you're test blind, but your scores can still be submitted. You're test blind for admission, but not for scholarship. And then you've got the writing component in there. And then you may or may not have your own test by 2025. Like, people's heads are going to be spinning. And there is a possibility, I'm in HECA, educational consulting group, and there's a lot of chatter in the boards. There's a possibility that could make things more complex. As one person said, my fear is you just created another coalition. In other words, is there now going to be the SAT, the ACT, and the UC entrance test? And so people need to take, it's just like, don't get me wrong. I think I support the quest for access, and I support people being evaluated on their production rather than their perceived potential. The transcript is a reflection of your productivity.
Yeah.
But I just wish they could have made it. Could they make it a little easier?
Well, I agree with you, Mark. And the reality is this is not going to be the last word. This actually takes me back to the efforts of the SAT to include socioeconomic factors in their landscape, and that was an ongoing discussion. Remember,
it was environmental context dashboard.
You got it. And then
landscape.
Wall Street Journal came out with a couple critical articles, and soon enough they remarketed it. So this is not the end of this discussion, and I'm sure that it's going to generate a lot of controversy and a lot of discussion, and that this is going to be a policy in evolution, most definitely. However, the end is in sight, and that is that colleges clearly want to move away from the import that standardized testing has on their college admissions, both for legal purposes, because I think it frees them from a lot of the scrutiny of the current affirmative action suits, but also from a philosophical one, that they recognize that these scores have taken on an importance far more import than they were ever intended to be. So they're trying to achieve a balance. And if that balance ends up being test blind, test optional, no test, another test, they're moving in a direction where they're trying to just change the playing field. Does that make sense, Mark?
Yeah. And this definitely hurts. I mean, College Board has lost $45 million already just by having the cancellation of the March, May, and June tests. And they would have lost even more had, they still had, of course, AP exam money coming in. And they have people who have signed up for a lot of these tests. And instead of necessarily just getting their money back, they were able to select another date. Right. And so this, this is just what I do like about this is look, it's very complicated. It's very complicated. The bottom line is the SAT or the ACT combined with grades, curriculum, and all the other things schools use does help predict academic GPA. But the question is always, at what cost? What cost? And one of the things that this does is it puts a significant dent into the impact and the import of the SAT.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about it, because when you talk to so many schools, the SAT is just accepted. I mean, just look at movies. You'll hear people say it. I can't tell you how many times I've heard Dick Vitale say, oh, the Dukies, oh, the kids with the 1550 on the SAT, Vanderbilt. He goes on and on. Sorry, my Dick Vitale impression is very lame, Dave. It's very lame. I'm going to stop right now not while I'm ahead, while I'm behind.
You'd have to turn up the volume and blow out my headphones to get Dick Vitale right.
But it's funny. I was watching a movie the other day, and the person comes in and is like, I went to Stanford. I got 1,600 on my SAT. And he's taking this lady on a date. And she said, oh, I got 1,590. And it is all like bragging rights, like, oh, you're smarter than me. Yeah. And it's like taking on this, almost iconic significance in a way that's just fallacious and quite honestly troubling. And so there's going to be a dent in that, as schools are going to have to rethink. But I'll tell you why this becomes a problem. Mm-hmm. So many public schools, they're just crunching numbers, and they're looking at GPA and test scores. And that's their metrics. They don't have the size in the admission office to have more complex ways of assessment, or either they don't have the money in their budget, they haven't made it a priority to put that in the budget. And I think it's going to present a real dilemma for schools that have had as their staple, grade point average and test scores, and that's how we admit. And now there's going to be a tremendous blowback against those schools. Well, if Cal Berkeley and UCLA and all these other schools can make decisions without it, why are you doing it? You can't say like your applicant pool is just so brilliant and has more straight A kids that you needed to differentiate than they have. And so that whole discussion, how it plays out, is going to be very, very interesting over the next few years.
I go back to two state programs that were actually so successful that they had to be scaled back to some degree. But I remember when Texas and Florida both got rid of affirmative action. And one of the things that they instituted was, I think Texas had it at the time, the top 10% of high school kids would get into one of the UT system schools. Florida had 20%. I think California started instituting 4%. And over the years, they twiddled with the numbers to try and get the right balance. But what they recognized,
California still has a 12.5%. But yeah, you're right. Yeah, Texas went from 10 to 7, and more recently to 6.
Right, correct. But what they recognized that it was excellence within the context of the school that you were in, and it recognized that the person who was excellent in his school context, even if that school was for whatever reason not competitive on an SAT or ACT basis with the school that had everything, that kid by his character and that kid by his performance still represented someone who would be successful within that system. And the bigger goal that they recognize is that the United States is losing its global competitiveness because we're simply not educating our kids. You know, we are only 350 million people. And China has almost 2 billion. India has about 1 billion. You know, most people don't realize that China has more college-educated, middle-class people in China than we have in our whole country. What that means economically is that China's market, they can just outbuy us. They can just outwork us. They have more educated kids, so they have more minds that they can throw at any problem, whether it's artificial intelligence, coming up with the new electric car. That's why Tesla is going to break out in China. So unless we can get all of our kids up to speed, and I mean all of them, white kids, black kids, poor kids, middle-class kids from all regions, educated, we will not compete globally as a country. So unless we take this task of educating all of our kids and giving them all opportunities, the bottom line, we're all going to lose. And that's the big picture, I think, that everybody's got to get out of this. And that if the SAT is now being a hindrance to truly identifying the best and the brightest of every socioeconomic strata and of every culture and of every race in society, just because they can't perform on a test, but we give them an opportunity and they would perform great in college, then we've got to rethink that criteria.
Yeah, and you know, one of the things I like about test optional, I have to admit, is test optional. What it does is it puts so much emphasis on the transcript, right? And that both the grades you've taken and the course and both the courses you've taken and the grades you've gotten in those courses. Well, you know what? That is a better reflection of character. Sure, it still has a lot of class bias in it, of course, because we've said ad infinitum over and over again, all the advantages of having educated parents who emphasize education and put you in the best schools for 14 years and give you the best tutors and summer programs and experiences. So it's not devoid of not having class ramifications, but at least grades, you know, take into consideration some extremely important things in life, such as motivation, drive, work ethic, insatiable love of learning, relationship with teachers, and resiliency. Mm-hmm. And those things are character things. And I would argue that those things are highly correlated with life success. And never forget, Dave, when I was doing boarding school admissions, and you know, I couldn't just sit here and make decisions on this test without trying to figure out a little bit more about the correlation. So I literally did a study of 5 years worth of data on my own. I would be in the office in the wee hours, and I was quite underwhelmed at how many kids tested like rocket scientists and had poor grades. There was way more than you would think.
Right.
And of course, you know, the SSAT is highly correlated to the SAT, and they did the same thing. And so they get the 1550s and the 35s on the ACT, but if they couldn't put it all together. Now, in fairness, a lot of times it was emotional stuff, sometimes it was motivation stuff. Sometimes it was health. Sometimes it was depression, anxiety, and things like that. Right. But grades measure productivity. They do.
Yeah.
Now, there is going to be a challenge here. And there's one reason why it's still going to take a little work for some of the most selective schools to give up on the test is because the grade inflation that's out there.
Yeah.
It is going to be hard when you have a sea of A's and you don't have the test as one tool in your bag. But it's going to put more focus on curriculum. I'm going to tell you, for those of you who are listening, there's going to be more focus on did you get into the advanced courses and do well in them.
Correct.
You know? But I think we've talked about this enough, Dave. I know we've had lots of podcasts on this, even recently. But with a bombshell article like this, we had to call an emergency podcast, pick it up, address it, and just drop what we were going to talk about. Because this is going to have significant ramifications for quite a while. And it'll be interesting to see what other shoes drop and who else follows suit, because you can rest assured. I mean, let's look at the West Coast right now. Every public school in Oregon's test optional right now.
Yeah.
Okay. And now, and the Cal States went test blind. And so you got the biggest school district in the country, the Cal State system. And then you've got the biggest test taking district, or the most people that take the test, the UCs. I mean, combined, that's like 800,000 students.
Yeah.
Well, so I think what I think we need to do. Let's just continue, you and I, to read, stay abreast, stay apprised of what's going on, and let's come back and revisit this. Let's see let's see where we are. Certainly at least a year from now, if not sooner, and let's see what other schools. One of the questions Dave asked me through the week when I talked to him about this, I guess it was yesterday.
Yeah.
He said to me, do you think Ivies are going to go test optional now? And my response to him is some Ivies I think will. Ivies don't beat to the same drum on everything.
Yeah.
And just like Cornell went test optional for this year. So there'll be a few more of those designer names that will follow suit. It's inevitable. And we'll just have to see what happens.
Yes. And just to reiterate, test optional doesn't mean test blind. That I think that testing will always play some role. And certainly if you're a high tester and you can demonstrate that you can get a great test, then that's something that you could always add an addition to, but it's not going to be a requirement. And I think that's where most schools are going.
Well, and not only that, the proof will be in the pudding, Dave.
Yeah.
I do not see test scores being divorced from scholarships anytime soon.
No, absolutely not.
I was on a conference call with a director of admission at a school I won't mention, but it's one of those names everybody would know. And they've gone test optional because of the stuff going on right now, temporarily. And then the question came up, well, are you going to go test optional for scholarships? And then the response is, you have to see how extraordinary our top of our pool is.
Right.
And we have to have some way of differentiating these kids from other kids. And sure, you could use other ways, interviews, recs, this, that, the other. I just don't see people doing that. I see them doing that in addition too. But wake me up the day when there's not a correlation between test scores and scholarship. And by the way, basically what we're saying is don't look for the SAT or the ACT to be obsolete because of this, because it's not. It's still going to be around.
And big picture, once again, you're going to have to run into tests sometime. If you're going to medical school, they're not ever going to get rid of the MCATs. I guarantee you that. Yep. If you're going to law school, they'll never get rid of the LSATs. You'll always have the GMAT. If you're going to Google Microsoft or whatever, that's right.
Test, you'll have the CPA exam. I mean, it's just yes.
The life is a series of tests. So don't use this as an excuse to say, now I'll never have to face the hurdle of being an adequate test taker in the future, because you're just delaying the inevitable. If this is a weakness that you have, you still must address it. You still must do to the best of your ability. But it's just recognizing that at this stage, that it needs to take on a lesser importance. But eventually, no matter where you are in the race, you got to catch up.
Now it's time for our step-by-step walkthrough of the college admissions process.
Okay, Anika, somebody had a graduation in the family. Give me the details.
Janaea, best virtual day ever. Naya is official now. She graduated from George School. She is a 2020 graduate, new alum of George School, or young alum, I should say. And it was just so nice. We did, they really came through in terms of the quality of what they put on.
Oh, good.
They had the kids connected in the Zoom, so they could be together. And then the parents watched it through the Vimeo, Vimeo, whatever.
Vimeo. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And then afterward, we had family and friends come on to another Zoom and gave her congratulations. She really enjoyed that because she was able to see people and they were able to talk to her. So that was really nice. So it was really, really, really quarantine style, but it was all good.
Yeah. So I'm wondering, how much does online diminish the quality of it?
Well, and that's what everybody, parents, all these parent meetings are freaking out, oh, it's going to be okay. Nobody knew what to expect at all. I don't even know if George fully knew what to expect.
Right.
Because we've been having programs, we had a recognition ceremony a couple days before, then there was another, meeting for worship the day, so we've been leading up to it. So you had a sense.
Okay.
But it didn't take away from it as much as you thought it would.
Oh, good.
So
that exceeded expectations.
Yeah, it did. It did. I mean, that's, not saying much, but still, it was a nice day. It was a really nice day. So
love it. Mm-hmm. All right, friends, we are transitioning to the first of 2 weeks where we're going to be talking about the PLUS loan. And just for those of you who are not regulars, I wrote a book called 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions. And this is the part of the podcast where we go chapter by chapter through all 171 chapters, all 691 pages. And I actually have 70 chapters on money. So from episodes 93 through 162, we're going to be talking money every time. And we're almost at the halfway point of our money talk. We're in our 30th money chapter. So, Anika, you've read the chapter.
Mm-hmm.
This is just the facts chapter on PLUS loan. And then next week is me editorializing a lot where I'm going to give what I like and what I don't like about this loan. But this week is just the facts.
Yeah, I thought you kept it light. I was like, Mark shouldn't be throwing daggers in this chapter.
Oh, well, you got to go ahead to the next chapter. All kind of daggers flying.
Oh, yeah, okay.
I held my fire back.
Well, good for you.
Trust me. When you read next week's chapter in prep, you'll be like, oh, okay, that's the Mark I know.
There's the Mark Plus man I know. So let's start up from the top because you said this is originally known as the Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students. And you also mentioned that this has now evolved into a PLUS loan for graduate students. So is that acronym still the same? Let's just start there.
Yes. So PLUS, obviously, Parent Loan for Undergraduate Students is, does PLUS, right? That's how you get the term PLUS. But there's also a graduate school version of this loan. So that's why most of the time people rarely call it the PLUS loan anymore. What you hear them call it is the Parent Plus loan.
Right. Mm-hmm.
And then there's also a Grad Plus loan. And it makes sense to do that because it differentiates the two loans. Now, they have the same interest rates, so there's some similarities.
Okay.
But it's very different. If you're an undergraduate parent trying to figure out how you're going to afford college, you're not even thinking about any grad school, right? It's just,
right.
So, and most of our listeners would be in that category. They would be parents of kids looking at undergraduate. And so they'll know this most likely as the Parent Plus loan, but originally it was just called the PLUS loan.
Okay, so let's dive a little more into it. So it's administered by the Department of Education.
Correct.
And the application itself for the loan is you said it's mostly the schools use the studentloans.gov is where you apply for this thing.
Yeah, because it's a federal loan. Mm-hmm. And that's a federal loan website. So that's where you go. And the parent is going to have to use their FSA ID. You remember that? How you need an FSA ID?
I do.
For the FAFSA?
Mm-hmm.
So the parent's going to have to use their FSA ID. And then it's pretty clear. You go down to the fourth point. It just kind of walks you through step by step.
All right. Okay. Hence the reason why you have to apply for FAFSA, I'm sure.
Correct.
Before you even apply to this. Correct. And then here's the meat of it. This obviously is the most important part to me is how parents qualify for the loan. And so...
can I take a step back before you even do this, Anika?
Yeah.
So one thing I want to talk about is like one of the reasons why this loan comes up is because if you have a family that is not saved for college at all, and they don't have overage between their income and their savings, their income and their college expenses, where they can just take a skim off the top of their income and use the overage toward paying for college. And if you don't get a ton of scholarships, then you have limited options for paying for college, especially if you want to stay in the dorms, because the dorms in of itself are going to be depending, 9 to 19, depending on, meal plan and the school and everything. So just that alone is going to be 9 to 19. And then, we know tuition can vary, wildly, right? From a couple $1,000s to $60,000 just for that. Right. So if there's a family that hasn't saved at all, normally, me, I have views of maximum amounts of loans I would take. If I'm advising them, I'm generally going to encourage them to stay within their budget. But I have families that say, okay, that's nice, but I'm going to do what I'm going to do. I had a family that said it to me recently, like, Stucker, I've heard you. We're taking out these loans. We made up our mind. This is what we're going to do. So I've heard you. You've made your point. Back off. So there's what I advise, and then there's what families say they're going to do anyway. And so when I have a family, and let's say they're like $30,000, $40,000 short of paying for college or even more, then of course I'm going to talk to them about the federal direct student loan, which we'll get deeply into talking about in chapter 124, because that's that chapter. But the problem is when I mention that, they'll say, and I tell them that's $5,500 for freshmen, they'll say, that's it? That's it? How am I going to get the other 30 or 40 grand? And so that's why this loan comes into play, is because it is a loan that can enable a parent to borrow up to the full cost of attendance minus any financial aid that you've already received.
All right.
So literally, let's say a family just got $5,000 from the school in financial aid, and let's say the cost of the college was $70,000, you could borrow up to $65,000 through this loan. So that's why it often comes up, because it's a way that a family can get a substantial amount of money. So I just want to say that.
Yeah, but let me just jump to one of the points in the chapter about that, about the family itself. So you said that the parent must be the biological or the adoptive parent, and step parents rarely get approved. Like, why is that?
Yeah, in fact, I'm going to answer that, but I'm going to go even a little deeper. So grandparents usually are not approved either. Guardians are usually not approved. So usually grandparents are not approved, guardians are not approved, step parents are not approved. Now, grandparents that become official legal guardians, they're approved usually. Okay. And it's so funny, Anika, because I had this on my list of questions to ask you, and you beat me to it. You got me first.
Family makeup. Let's just go and do it.
Yeah, it's like a draw, the OK Corral, and you drew on me first, because I was going to ask you this. But you asked me, so I'll tell you what I'm pretty sure the answer is. I can't say I've heard like a workshop or a seminar from the Department of Education on this topic, but this is why I'm pretty sure the answer to that is. The Department of Education, the federal government is giving you a loan, and maybe a loan for a lot of money. And so there's an aspect where they're looking at what are the chances of defaulting, right? And so think about it. If it's a grandparent, that could be somebody older, there's potential for default. And so I think they're looking at the step parent and saying there's not the same commitment as the biological parent. And so I don't know this for sure, but I'm pretty sure the reason is because you're not connected the same way the biological parent or the adopted parent is. They don't feel like you're potentially you're not as vested, that there's more of a chance of default. Does that make sense?
Now, what if the step parent is I'm not in this situation, so I'm not familiar with it. So can the step parent become a legal guardian of the child?
All right. So let me say this. There are cases where step parents are approved. Step parent is just not a clear slam dunk no. Okay? Step parent, there's an appeals process, and sometimes step parents are approved. It's case by case. So, and that may be one of the cases. I don't know all the particulars of when approved and not approved. I just know that step parents normally are not approved, but sometimes they can be.
And I think you're about to, that kind of answered the question that I had after that, which is because it says that the payments begin as soon as the loan is dispersed. Like, you're not waiting until the kid gets out of college. So is it in that same theory of, okay, we can't afford anybody to default on this thing, we got to start making them pay on this loan? Like,
okay, so let's talk about that. So you normally can defer your payments till 6 months after graduation, or until a student drops below half-time status, which is basically one class, right? Because full-time status is considered 12 credit hours, half-time is 6, below 6 would basically be one class. So normally you can defer the loan till after, just like the federal credit.
You can.
Normally you can.
Okay.
Now, if the loan is processed through the student government loan website with the primary loan servicer, you can always do that. If you get a different loan servicer, you can request to have it deferred. Because if you think about it, most of the time, if you have a family that needs $30,000 or $40,000, they're probably not in a position to start making monthly payments right away after the loan's dispersed.
Right.
Most of the time, that's not going to work for that family. So in most cases, almost everybody I've worked with that ever takes this loan out, they get it deferred.
Okay. And you also say, Mark, that you can cancel the loan. Like, how do you cancel a loan?
Well, you can either cancel a loan by deciding not to do it, or by paying it off early and, no prepayment penalties.
Oh, when you say cancel, I thought you meant like, okay, I don't want to do this anymore. Like, this child dropped out of college. I just didn't know what that scenario was. Like, when you say you cancel the loan, like you have the option to cancel the loan. Correct.
And one thing, I know you're going to probably get into this, but it's important to know how people qualify or are not qualified for this loan.
Anika and I are so grateful for everyone who has financially supported our podcast. It allows us to pay our staff and cover our other auxiliary expenses involved in having a weekly professional podcast.
At the start of every month, we're going to start sending a special gift to anyone who financially supports your college-bound kid.
I will be sending our donors this bonus content once a month directly to your email. The bonus content will be between 10 to 15 minutes in length. Usually it will be a college-related topic that I'm passionate about. Occasionally, it'll be another bonus hot topic in the news segment. Sometimes it'll be an answer to a question that one of our listeners submits to us via email.
And you'll receive these monthly audio blogs for a gift of any amount. We know that $5,000 to one person is $5 to someone else, and we don't want your budget to be a hindrance to you receiving this additional bonus content. So if you want to support our show, just go to yourcollegeboundkid.com and click the donate button. And if you've already financially supported our podcast, you will automatically start receiving this bonus content via your email.
This bonus content is our way of letting our financial supporters know in a tangible way how much we appreciate you. And if you have any questions at all about our monthly bonus content, just send your questions our way. That's to questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Once again, questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com.
Do you remember how I talked about adverse credit history?
Yeah, well, that's the part I wanted to get into first.
Yes.
Another part.
Okay.
Yeah,
all right. Let me make sure that people understand that, because that's really important.
Okay, you want to go ahead and dive into that?
Yeah, so why don't you talk about it and I'll fill in some blanks.
Okay, so the parent does have to go through a credit check. Doesn't have to have a high 700 plus score, but there are some ways that you identify that where there's going to be a clear denial. So the first one is that if there's more than a little over $2,000 in 90 days of delinquent debt or written off collection, you can just forget about it. You're not going to qualify. And within the last 5 years, if there's any record of bankruptcy, foreclosure, repossession, tax lien, wage garnishment, or default, you will not be qualifying for this loan.
Correct. So and I'm trying not to jump ahead to next week because I do a lot of editorializing next week.
Boiling.
Well, yes, it is. I was going to try to be PC, but no, why pretend my blood is boiling? So the thing about this loan, is a student or as a parent automatically approved for the loan? No. So that's different than the undergraduate federal direct student loan, right? Now, don't get me wrong. Even for that, there's still some basic checks, but they're basic, right? Like, Are you a U.S. citizen, permanent resident, major drug convictions, or have you defaulted on student loans in the past? You still need to clear those hurdles, but those are basic. But as long as you clear that as a student loan, you're going to get it. For a parent loan, you do have to apply. There is an application process. But once again, you don't have to have sky-high credit. They're basically, the term that the Department of Education uses is adverse credit history. Do you have adverse credit history? And you read the things that qualify as adverse credit history. Mm-hmm. As long as you don't have adverse credit history, you're going to be approved.
Okay.
Now, one thing I will tell you is even if you do have adverse credit history, there is an appeals process, which sometimes you can win. And also, there is also an option of getting a co-signer who does not have adverse credit history to back you. Mm. But what happens when you co-sign a loan, Anika?
You put your life all the way on the line. Don't do it.
Yes, and I have scars still from doing that and getting burned, trying to help one of my students out.
Oh, goodness gracious, Mark.
But I will say this. After the student burned me for, it was like $2,300, they called me like years later. And this is like I should have said in the podcast, this was like within the last couple of months, Anika.
Oh.
And they sent me the money.
Oh, good.
Was that nice? Well, yeah, because when you're not expecting a couple grand and it just gets Venmo to you, like, it's time to party.
Well, good for them. I know that was tough, though.
Well, it was hard on them, too. Like, it's a very good person. They just, you know what I mean? They got in a jam.
Yeah. Oh, man. Yeah, so I know.
Go ahead.
Mm-hmm. No, I was going to say, are we just going to stop till next week? Do we really, till the fire starts popping off? Or?
Well, no, I'm gonna. It's a good thing we're doing this now versus even 2.5 years ago when we wrote the book, because I've learned to accept the fact that there are some times when this loan makes some sense. I'll give some caveats next week, where I was pretty black and white on it before, not liking it. I mean, I will tell everybody now I don't like the loan. Okay, so you'll find out why next week, but I don't like it. I will say that this week, but I will also say next week what times when it makes some sense, and I can understand certain instances when it makes some sense. So I'm not as black and white dogmatic as I used to be on it. Now, a couple other things. Do you remember what I said about the interest rate on this loan?
Is it decent? Let me see. What is the interest rate? Is it like
7? I can cover you if you're floundering on the notes over there. The old tinker's failing you. I can bail you out.
I'm gonna say 7%. I remember seeing the number.
Okay, good. So let me say this: the rate is announced June 1st of every year.
Okay.
Because every time you take out the loan, it's a fixed loan, and you're locked into that rate. But it's like a 1-year fixed rate. It's not like you have to take this loan every single year. You need money, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then you'll get the rate that is set for June 1st of that given year.
It's about to come out. Okay.
No, it just came out. It was announced. I mean, June 1st is like literally now, right? Yeah. So the rate came out, and the good news is because of course interest rates are going down like crazy, for pretty much everything, right? Refinancing, mortgages, cars, I mean, you name it. And the rate dropped substantially. It was 7.08 last year was the rate. And this year was 5.3. That's the rate for effective in June 1st, 5.3. So it dropped to 1.78.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah. So that is nice. Like 5.3 is not like better than 7.08. But there's another thing to keep in mind. There isn't a loan origination fee with this loan, and it's not insignificant. That's a one-time fee you pay, but it's not cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you think, Anika? Without getting into next week, like, when you think of this loan, like, do you see anything that you like about it that's kind of a positive?
I mean, the positive is that you said that there is some light in this loan, like this Parent Plus loans, because you got me drilled into, oh my God, this is the worst thing ever.
Yeah.
And there are circumstances where you just don't have a choice. Like, what about those folks who just don't have a choice? So I am interested to hear, like, what the alternative, are there other alternatives? If they're not, and if this is all you got, then you do have to do what you got to do.
Yeah. I mean, see, this is where I don't want to jump into next week too much, but I would challenge the notion that a family has to do this $40,000, $50,000, $60,000 loan thing. Like, I would take the position that if you have not saved any money, you do not get any scholarships, okay, and you do not have the ability to take a portion of your earnings, even if you don't have savings. But let's say you don't have any savings, but let's say you make $120,000, but you're living off $80,000. So you can take money just off your paycheck and use it and create a payment plan. If you're not able to do that, I'm going to tell you you're living above your means. And I'm going to tell you that there are ways to get college a lot more affordably, including doing a 2-year program and transferring in. And so I'm big on staying within your budget, but I recognize that there's a certain portion of people that are just going to say, I'm not going to do that, Mark. Or another option is to not have the dorm experience right away and save on that and be a commuter for a while and then transfer in. But I understand, and I understand, like, there's a mindset out there that says, look, you only do this thing once, and you can always make money. You can't have a college experience all over again. So we're going to do whatever we have to do to make it work. Right. I get that to a certain extent, but I also see the financial turmoil that it puts people in. So, all right. I think any other questions at all that you have about, we talked about the current interest rate. Mm-hmm. We've talked about, now this is a parent loan in the parent's name. This has nothing to do with the student. Right. So if the person ends up defaulting or the kid drops out of school, the parent has no recourse at all to say, hey, student, I did this for you. Pony up. That's just I just want to be clear about that. We've talked about, do you have to make payments while your child's in school? We've talked about what adverse credit history is. We actually talked about how you apply. I think we covered most of it. I mean, I guess the one thing we didn't say is you do have to fill out a master promissory note, an MPN, which is just like an agreement between you and the federal government in terms of the loan. Other than that, I think I'm loaned out. I'm plussed out until next week.
Until next week. We got it.
All right.
It's time for a question from one of our listeners.
All right, Mark, this week's question is from a Facebook follower.
Yay!
Yeah, Miss Patrice, thanks so much for your question last week.
It's our first one, I think, ever from Facebook because we have the lamest Facebook page.
Look at that interactive page. Woohoo!
Because we don't know a thing about social media. At least I know. Well, you know about social media, but you don't have the time to work it. And I don't know anything about it. Or, well, I guess I could make the time if I really want it, but that is.
As we digress in our social media flaws.
Yes.
Thank you for Patrice for this question. And Patrice says or asks, is there any advice for juniors on activities they could do this summer to help them stand out on admissions applications? And obviously this is, very specific to, because we got all this madness going on around COVID-19. What in the world can these kids do this summer? And how do we stay aligned still with whatever process still remains in the admissions world?
Yeah, it's a great question by Patrice, and I hope she understood when she asked it. I said, Patrice, I could give you like 3 or 4 lines on Facebook, but if you can wait 2 weeks, I can give you 15 minutes. Well, so hopefully she's okay with that. But lots of things. So first of all, I've been communicating with a lot of different admissions officers and about the question of how COVID is impacting college admissions. And one thing they're consistently all saying is, we are going to be extremely interested in what you did, you meaning the student, from March to September. When you had this 6 months of free time, or even if we want to say the summer, let's say March to May, or, junior's still in school. What did you do over the summer? What did you do with your free time? We know you can't do AAU basketball. It was canceled. We know your research project that you had all lined up was canceled. We know your study abroad plans were canceled. We know you couldn't travel around and visit colleges, but what did you do with your time? In fact, this is such a prescient question that, Rick Clark, who we've had on the podcast twice, one of my favorite admissions people, director of admission at Georgia Tech, he said, we're going to get a boatload of essays on COVID. We already know that. That's a fact. Why not? It's impacted students' lives in a major way. Why would they not write on it? But he said, one thing we're seriously looking at doing is changing one of our college-specific questions to ask the question that we want to know. And he said, one thing we're seriously looking at is asking that question. What did you do with your time? So that's an important question. And by the way, this is important as well. And I'm going to share something else that Rick said. Students aren't the only one going through this tumultuous time. Schools are as well. And so one thing Rick shared was a webinar he was on. And this one thing he said was, we accepted 350 international students. We don't know if they're going to be able to get visas. That's $12 million to our budget. So what do? He said, we can go to our wait list and we could immediately go to our out-of-state wait list and take 500 kids off our wait list. And let's say 70% of them come, that's 350. But what if these international students get their visas? Where do we house them? So the point is, know that schools are also going through the same sort of upheaval and angst and agita that everybody else is as they try to sort this stuff out. That's just something to keep in mind. Because I'm like, can you imagine that problem, Anika? Like, what do?
Mm-hmm.
You don't want to be $12 million under budget, but then if you take a bunch of kids off the wait list and they all get visas, like, where do you put them? That's a problem. Mm-hmm. So let me hone back into what students need to do this summer. Let me not stray off Patrice's question too far. One thing I want to say is the majority of pre-college summer programs, whether they're academic or non-academic, they have moved to online. So most of the programs, not like they canceled, they just moved to an online version. So that's the first thing I would say is whatever pre-college programs you were thinking about looking into, don't assume that they're just canceled because so many of them, maybe even the majority of them, have moved to online, and there are thousands of them that are on. And just like you said, the graduation was still good online. These programs are still going to be good online. Sure, It may not be the same thing, but they're still going to be good. So don't rule out previous options that you were considering because many of them are just available in the online version. Any thoughts on that, Anika?
No, that makes perfect sense. And I wouldn't have thought of that either because it's just, you feel like everything's just gone so flat, like everything just disappeared. But everybody is moving pretty quickly to this technology is like zooming off the rip.
I know. And so the next question, and this is something that's very much in the minds of parents and students, well, what are the best things I can do to really stand out? Like, what's going to make me look the best? Like, that's the most common question, right? That people are wondering. And I know this might sound trite. I know this might sound contrived. It may seem overly simplistic. But the real answer is, what are you interested in? What is it that you like? That's what should govern your what you do. I was listening to Don Bishop from Notre Dame. He's been in admissions almost 40 years. And he was saying people who try to contort their application to give us what they think we want to hear, we have no interest in that kid. Not at all, no matter how amazing they are academically. But he went on to say, the student who says, this is who I am, and with all my authenticity, I'm going to present to you who I am. My interests are really my interests. My extracurriculars are the things I really like. The courses I take are the ones I love. He said, well, we'll go to bat for that kid, even if their academic profile is below some of the other students, and we'll push for that kid over the other kid. And so the first thing starts with reflection and introspection and says, what is it that I really like? What is it I really enjoy? And that should guide and govern your thinking. That's the starting point. Now, that may seem overly simplistic, but I really think it's important to mention that. What do you think, Anika? Do you feel like, duh, that's dumb, that makes no sense? Or do you think, no, it's kind of important?
I think it's very important. I mean, I agree. Everything, I agree is what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it really is. So let's put some flesh on these bones. Let's say service is your thing. Okay? Then you want to use your creativity. And a lot of the admissions officers I'm talking to about this, they're saying, we want to see how students use their creativity. So if service is your thing, I was talking to, this was a parent recently, who's really passionate about the elderly, and she feels really bad about COVID. So she's trying to make meals and deliver them, kind of like her own little version of Grubhub or Uber Eats, but without charging people. She's like, wants to do the cooking and deliver meals to elderly and then just do that contactless carry thing and drop it at their doorstep. So that's something a student could do. But I would want you to do that if you had a passion for service, a passion for the elderly, and cared about COVID. That's why you would do it. I wouldn't want you to do it because, that's like going to look really good on my resume for college admissions.
Right.
And so it's a matter of like looking at what you love and then tapping into your creative bone and juices and come up with something creative, doing what you love, because I can't emphasize this enough. Admissions officers don't just have one or two things they're looking for, or this is better than that. So many things you can do extracurricular wise are good to an admission office. But what really matters is, do you care? As one quote I love, it goes something like this, I may butcher it, is we don't care about your extracurriculars. All we care is that you care. I kind of butchered it, but hopefully you get the gist of it.
We get it.
I'm bad at stuff like that. I know I jacked it up. I'm glad you get it. And so Joy is extremely interested in getting her master's in mental health, clinical mental health. In fact, she's already, Joy's a senior now, Anika, so she's looking at just like Jalen. This one year you're ahead of me. You already have a student in grad school, Jalen.
Oh my goodness! But
Joy is pretty much got it down. She's got 3 North Carolina schools she's very interested in. She looks like she's going to apply to UF and FU. Florida International. No, sorry, that's FU sounded bad. I got to delete that. UF and FSU. UF and FSU. UF and FSU. Oh boy, I need some sleep. And then she's going to apply to Georgia State, Vanderbilt, and she's going to apply to North Carolina State and UNCC. And guess what? Maybe A&T, Anika, they've got a good program in clinical mental health. Yep, for a master's. So she's all into that. So she's using her time to focus on that. And she's going to take a Coursera course on mental health. So you can take free online courses or places at edX or Class Central, all these different places that offer them. Those are all great things. Find an area of interest, take an online course. There's a lot of things you can do. It's just a matter of using your creativity. I was thinking of this. It would be a super creative idea. Let's say you're passionate about baseball and you can't play baseball because it's canceled. So you got 4 or 5 of your players together on your team and you all logged in together at the same time at Zoom and you did like a Zoom workout together for accountability to keep yourself in shape. Like, that's an example of using your creativity to pursue what you love in a unique way. What do you think?
That's really interesting. So but are you saying that specifically that could, and again, only if that's your thing.
Correct.
But you would talk about that in your application or whatever essay.
Yes.
Is that I created a Zoom for my 5 baseball friends and we worked out.
Yes, because we wanted to stay in shape. We weren't having practices. We knew it was going to be important. We knew there could be a tendency to...
I like that. I really like that.
But the point is, like, it's not so much these things individually. It's that you start with what you love.
Right.
And then you say, okay, how can I creatively pursue what I love? And you don't start with what do the college admissions officers want to hear.
Right.
And and here's one other thing I want to share. Now, I learned this from an investment guy I follow really closely. His name's Meb Faber. He started Cambria Funds in California. Even that he's from North Carolina originally, and North Carolina and Colorado is kind of where he grew up. But so I use this as podcasts a lot. It's a good podcast if you're hardcore into investing. And he says so many people reach out to him and they show him their resume and they say, look, I want to do an internship with you. Like, look at what I've done. I've done this. I've done that. I think I'd be great. I'd like for you to bring me on as an internship, paid or unpaid, right? And he said, you want to know the person that impresses me? The person that reaches out and says, what are your needs? Because I want to come and serve you. And I want to learn everything I can in the process, but just by being around and being in this environment. He's like, that's the person that I'm going to select. And the reason why I'm bringing this up, Anika, is as you think about creative ways to pursue your passions, that's the mindset you should have. So if you're interested in medical field, you should be thinking about reaching out to various people, whether it's occupational therapy, physical therapy, hospitals, doctor's offices, and say, I'm extremely interested in the medical field. What are your needs right now? Is there something I could research for you online? Like, I know I'm limited because of distancing, but I'm interested in the medical field. Is there anything at all I could do at a distance to help you right now? And that's the approach that you should take to really get yourself.
I was going to ask you, Mark, what about working? because first of all, does work count as something meaningful that you could talk about in your whatever you write or essay application? And because people are hiring right now, like, whether it's Target or Out or whatever, is that something to consider? I mean, if you want to talk about your work ethic, just say, I need to work. Like, I wanted to balance my time. I mean, is that a thing? Or
Absolutely. A lot colleges love work, and a lot of times they love jobs that can even be more menial because it sort of shows that you're not entitled and you're willing to kind of do what you need to do to fund your education. So a lot of times people think, well, that's not a glamorous job. But a lot of times colleges say, well, I think it's great that, you like swept floors and you didn't think you were above that. You learn responsibility, you learn how to manage money, you learn that everything's given to you, and you're not perceived as entitled a lot of times when you have those kinds of jobs. Like life is just given to you on a silver spoon. And so colleges appreciate work, very much appreciate work.
Okay, that's good.
I'm glad you brought that up.
Good to know.
So those are some pointers for Patrice. Use your creativity, do what you love, and realize that there's not one right answer. As long as it's productive and you're doing it because you really, truly want to do it, then colleges, they're cool with that.
All right.
And by the way, they very much understand that so much of what you may have had planned has been removed. They very much understand that, just like they're experiencing the same level of upheaval. I think we tied it up, Anika.
Yeah, let us know what your baby gets into.
Hey, listen, I'll tell our listeners it's Monday, Memorial Day. We are recording on Memorial Day. What do you got? What are your plans the rest of the week today? Are you a barbecuer?
Nah, Javon is. I'm not.
Are you fishing? Eater. Are you going fishing again?
No, I'm a barbecue eater.
Okay.
So I am just waiting for him to finish up what he's doing down there.
Well, let me get off this podcast and let you go chow down.
Yes, please. Thank you.
Okay, friends, you asked us for more student interviews, and we've got a good one here. In part 2 of my interview with Carmen Chavez, a 12th grade senior in Miami, Florida, Carmen is really transparent. She opens up, she shares where she was admitted, waitlisted, and her decisions on all of her schools. She also reflects on what she felt she did well and what she would do differently if she had to do it all over again. And Carmen says something that so impressed me that it made me say, Carmen, I have to interview you. Listen as Carmen explains a brilliant idea that I am now telling all my students to do. Listen and enjoy.
And now, this week's interview with a special guest.
And it's just the process of paying attention to the little things. Like, what homework do you really enjoy, Like, do you like arguing with people? Maybe you want to go into this area. And I've just always tried to pay attention because I've always wanted to be a person who knows what they want.
No, and that may seem like basic advice, but it's something that actually goes overlooked a lot. And it's not just if you don't like chemistry, maybe you don't like chemistry, but are you looking at taking a course curriculum that's going to involve a lot of chemistry, like something maybe in the medical field?
Exactly. Yeah.
The other thing that you had was you definitely wanted to be around ambitious students. Like you would call me after a college tour. And if you didn't sense that the students were like striving, like with drive, and not all of them, but at least most of the students, you wanted them to have some drive and passion. If you did not sense that, that was not a school for you.
I know what school you're talking about specifically. I don't know if I should name them, but I really felt like it's an energy, and maybe it's something that's not really like not everyone can feel, but I feel like I can feel it. So I could really that's just speaks to the importance of like campus visits, because of course like every school is going to tell you like we have the best students, we have the most ambitious students. Of course they're going to do that, and it's only really like up to you when you visit campuses or like speak to the students, because my college interviews, they really kind of solidified how I felt about a school just based off of who like the alumni was and how they talked about the school. So just having that kind of personal connection, even if it's not a campus visit, I felt like was really important to me so I could read the atmosphere. And that's really like how I gauged it, even though that might not work for some people. That's really how it worked for me.
So why don't we talk about what, where you ended up applying to, and are you comfortable like sharing with people where you got in and where you didn't and all that, or not?
Oh, 100%, 100%.
Yeah, I'll just let you share whatever you're comfortable sharing, but I know our listeners are probably wondering a little bit about that at this point. Like,
oh, definitely. Yeah. I applied, I think, in the end to 10 schools. And this is tricky. I don't know if I have an acceptance rate of like my personal acceptance rate is 100% because I didn't get rejected, but I got a few wait lists. So take that how you will. But I got accepted from University of Miami, Michigan State, University of Florida, Northwestern, Duke, and I'm trying to think of, I think there may have been, GW and American. Those are the two I'm missing. And then I got waitlisted from UNC, UVA, and Georgetown.
good memory.
Yes, I'm really surprised I got all of them. I don't know if that adds up to 10, but in my mind it's 10.
It did, by the way. I was counting when you did it.
That's great. So I felt like not all, but probably 90% of my list had met either like one or two of the requirements, not requirements, but the main two things that I mentioned earlier of like spirit and ambition, which kind of can go like together most of the time. But so I applied early decision to Duke. I got deferred. I applied early
Yeah, that
action.
was a sad conversation, Carmen.
That was a very sad conversation. I actually want to talk about that later of like whether or not you should invest emotionally invest into the schools that you're applying to. But I applied early action to UM and UF, but I don't think UF has early action, but I applied by November 1st. I think that was just like their deadline. And everywhere else was regular. So I can imagine that's why I got waitlisted from a few of those schools that I kind of felt like I was going to get into. But I definitely should have applied to a few of those early. And I know you still...
Yeah, you had a little procrastination and you a little there, Carmen.
Yeah, I definitely did. If I could give like one piece of advice, and I'm sure everyone's heard it, it's that don't procrastinate. Write drafts as early as you can. It's so great because in that weird period between like in January sending in your applications and then getting them all kind of like late March, early April, I was like, let me look at my applications. And then I saw my essays and I was like, ooh, I would change this, this, and this. And I would like probably move that sentence over there. So just having a lot of time to reflect on your essays and your drafts, I'm sure you're going to find something you want to change. So it's just better to start early, which I'm sure everyone's heard. It's just so much, but it's so important.
So fast forward, obviously you were deferred initially at Duke, but then you got really good news on the same day, I think, from a couple schools.
Yeah.
That was a very fun conversation that we had.
Yeah. For regular decision, I think that, okay, so for early decision, when I got deferred, I think the problem with my mindset was that I was like, oh, I think I'm going to get in. Like I had in my head, my chances of getting in were really high when they shouldn't have been. And I think that's a problem that a lot of people can fix. And like, of course you can't help yourself from getting overexcited, but it kind of does hurt. So in regular decision, when I opened it, I don't know if I ever sent you my reaction video. Another pro tip, always film your reactions. It's just so fun looking back at them. I love it. All my friends did too. So we have like a giant video of all of our reactions. And so in regular decision, I came at it with I really know my chances of getting in. And I understand like those spots go to someone else and like the stats that come with being deferred. But I felt like really at peace with the fact that I applied early decision because like I did as much as I could and now it's really up to them. So that was really helpful. And it was really opening my Duke regular decision acceptance. I didn't hold that much weight on it because I already got accepted from like a school I really, really wanted to go to, Northwestern. just 2 days before. So I had already like baked a Northwestern cake, put on the icing, and I was just really excited, you know? And I didn't expect much. So I was like, oh my God, it's Northwestern time. And I was looking at stickers and all of that. And then I was so surprised to get into both of my top choices. Like that was just beyond me. Like the night before, I was like, oh my God, what am I going to do? And I was like, nope, we can't think about it. That is a decision for tomorrow if it becomes an option. But like, my God, it was so overwhelming to be like accepted into my top choices.
I was really happy for you. So what are the things that you feel you would do differently about your high school process? And why do you think you may have been deferred? And you know, I shared some things with you on that as well.
I probably.
Yeah.
I mean,
You want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I think, and both of those two questions have the same answer, I think. If I could do something over again, it would be to, not like I didn't do the best that I could, but for some classes that I ended up with B's, I know they could have been A. Like I know if I tried really hard, like I know it was possible for me, so I should have just done it. I don't know if it was laziness or something else, but you really don't want to like look at it and for some people who aren't as college oriented, like maybe that's not the case, but you don't want to look at an admissions decision and be like, I wish I did A, B, and C differently. And for me, that was really my grades, because my grades weren't horrible, but I did have B's here and there.
You know, you did really well, right? I mean, you were probably the top 2% of your class.
Yeah. Oh, let me mention my statistics so I just like get it out of the way for reference. I should have mentioned them earlier. My GPA unweighted was 3.74 in my early admissions round, and then 3.76, so like the same thing. And then weighted, I think this is what like saved me. Weighted and early was 4.8 something. And then after in regular, it was 4.9, like 2 or 4, I don't know. But it was like very clear that I had taken a lot of APs, and I think that was on my side. In like in opposition to all the Bs I got, it was like, oh, but I've taken, I think, 12 or 13 APs at the end of it all. I think I've taken that many. And I have my total SAT was 1550. And I think that's all the stats.
Yeah, I would say that just looking at you, Carmen, you were somebody who had outstanding curriculum as far as the rigor,
Mm-hmm.
A lot of leadership, and some pretty good extracurriculars, like not national, international, but within your school.
Yeah.
It'd be very evident that you're somebody who's going to be missed. Your recommendations, while I didn't get to read them, I got a real sense of how...
I read one of mine, actually.
Oh, you did? I'm sure it was really good.
It was great.
I got a real sense of how highly esteemed and acclaimed you were in the eyes of your teachers.
Mm-hmm.
So I knew those were going to be really good. So I think there would be no question about your curriculum. Certainly your standardized testing was strong, you know, and APs and all that stuff. But you did allow yourself to have 1 or 2 Bs in spring of the junior year.
Yeah.
And that's when so much of it is on the line. And even if they're higher Bs, you were applying to some of the most selective schools in the country.
Most definitely.
And I remember saying to you, you know, Carmen, you can feel really good about yourself if you did your absolute best. And you were like, I know I can do better.
Mm-hmm.
And then you banged out straight A's in senior year fall.
Yeah, that definitely
helped a tremendous amount. Now you had upward trajectory with your grades. Now you're showing the schools you really can, you know, do the kind of work they're expecting for you based on looking at your high testing and that kind of thing. Like that would be an expectation they would have from you. And so I think you really kicked it in gear when it came to your grades. And I think your writing started out mediocre and ended up being quite good.
It was bad.
And so, yeah, but I think that you know, I know that you for a while had real regrets that I think you thought that people would focus a lot on even your class rank or your AP scores and maybe cut you a little bit more slack for, you know, the occasional B. And when you're applying to some of the schools that you're applying to, those schools want to see A's or A minuses. And I'm not saying you can't have 1 or 2 B's in all of high school, but if you're going to get them, you don't want to get them in 11th grade.
Definitely not.
So one thing I want to talk to you about is something that you have been doing recently that has been incredibly impressive to me. In fact, it's really the genesis for what made me want to interview you.
Aww.
Literally, I say to all the time, I learn things from my students. I learn things from my parents. And I learned something that you have been doing that so impressed me that I said, Carmen, I want you to bring and share this with our listening audience. And so I want you to talk about what you've been doing now that you chose Duke over Northwestern, enrolled in Duke. You're going, oh, did we even say that yet? Or did I spoil the secret?
I think I implied it, but yeah.
Okay. I don't know. You were talking about that Northwestern cake and everything.
I did bake a Duke cake as well, for the record. I did.
Of course. And by the way, Carmen would talk a lot of trash to me about Duke basketball when they were playing. So I know she's truly going to be one of those Blue Devil people that's going to be part of the Cameron crazies on TV. I can see it right now.
I'm definitely going to be tenting as soon as possible. I hope it's possible this upcoming year, but if not, definitely next year.
Yeah. So let's talk about what you've been doing. And, I had conversations with you in the past about how helpful you found Instagram to be. And it's something that I try to emphasize with all the students. Look at social media, look at social media pages for clubs that you're interested in. And so I've always tried to, not always, because social media hasn't been around forever, but since social media's got really hot, I've tried to really emphasize that a lot for people as a great way to just kind of learn about the culture of the school.
Yeah.
But you've taken it to a whole different level. So why don't you share what you've been doing with social media? Because I'm really excited about this, and I want our listeners to, especially, juniors, sophomores, pay attention to this, because you can do the same thing Carmen did and is doing now. So take it away, Carmen.
So I've followed all of the universities that I applied to just so I can see what's going on, and that kind of spiraled into following the individual schools inside of the university. And so since I've committed to Duke, I've followed 1 million Duke accounts. It's kind of crazy if you look at my followers right now. But so I intend to double major in public policy and math. So I followed their Sanford School of Public Policy, their accounts, and they have 1 million other little institutes inside of that. So I followed a lot of them. And at the beginning of the week, usually either the main university page or even every other school page will have this is what we're doing this week kind of post on their story or just on their main page. And now, since everything's online, everything they're doing is on Zoom. Usually on campus, it would be little lectures from this club or this club. And so I saw one that I really found interesting. It was from the previous director of national intelligence. I don't remember her name, or I don't know if I should say it, but I saw a lecture from her, and it was a few weeks ago. It was kind of the goings on of the intelligence community. And I just was so amazed at the opportunity of just listening to her talk for an hour or two. And so I DM'd the account and I was like, hey, I just got admitted and I intend to major in public policy. I was wondering if I could join in on this since I'm an admitted student. And they were like, yeah, of course, why not? And so they sent me the link and everything. And they're like, of course, you can do this for any upcoming event. Don't worry about it. And they were just so sweet, and it was so great. And knowing that the school also had such a great social media outreach team. And since then, 2 or 3 weeks ago, I'm not sure, I've been going to almost every seminar from the public policy school. And it's been really great because every Wednesday they're having a seminar on COVID, and they have all these great professors coming in. And it's such a great experience because I'm in there with other Duke students. And recently I got to shadow a public policy class. And it was so great. There was a discussion segment and a lot of students were talking, and then you get to type in questions. For a lot of these seminars, you get to type in questions, not just the class shadows. And a few people have answered my questions, and it's just so crazy that I don't want to say that I can be in a Duke classroom, but That's almost what it's
You
like.
basically are in a Duke classroom,
Yeah, that's
Carmen.
how-
That's being in a Duke classroom.
That's basically it, right?
Next week, in the news, an article by Kevin Carey, The Public in Public College Could Be Endangered. Our book chapter by Mark and Anika will be part 2 of the Plus Loans. Our question from a listener is, how does having multiple kids in college at the same time impact what a parent will have to pay for each student? Our interview is part 3 with Miami student Carmen Chavez on what I did with my college interview process and what I would do differently. And our college spotlight is Drexel University in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania.
And have to thank one of our dedicated listeners, by the way, who sent Drexel in. So a lot of the college spotlights come from you and your requests. And by the way, thanks to everybody for sending all these great articles. I know I can never not know what's going on in the college admissions world because our listeners will make sure I know. And I love it. And a lot of times, Dave and I, we gauge what article to go with based on the volume of articles that come in from you, our listeners.
We do.
But I am excited today because I haven't done a spotlight in weeks. We had Vincent Garcia on talking about the CSU system. So we don't do college spotlights when we have a current college admission officer or a former college admission officer talking about specific schools. And last week, my laptop died. This week, I got a brand new one.
And so how much you pay? How much you pay?
Oh, you know what?
Yeah, coming from Brother Lincoln Penny.
So I'm fortunate in that my day job, if the day job, it was their laptop. So they sent me a freebie. So that would be a big donut, man. I beat your $250 and I got a better one.
Well, that's the best laptop of them all. It was free.
Yeah, unfortunately, my hard drive was fried and I'm so technologically incompetent and didn't have everything saved to the cloud. So, but I didn't want 4 weeks to go without a college spotlight, so I just redid it again, and it was all good because it just lets me to reinforce my notes and everything. I did meet with UMass Amherst earlier in the fall, so I had a lot of good notes from that, and here we go. So the first thing that you want you to know about UMass Amherst, it is the flagship school in Massachusetts, and Massachusetts is one of these states that would be in the conversation for states that have the best public education system. So there's a lot of talented kids in Massachusetts, and they have a fantastic option at UMass Amherst. If you're an outdoors lover, you're likely to love this school. It's in the western Massachusetts location, situated in the Pioneer Valley against the backdrop of the Berkshires. If you like hiking, skiing, canoeing, all of that is right there. And it is 90 miles west of Boston, 150 miles north of New York. It's kind of a cross between what you'd consider more of a remote location with farmland around, but more of a small college town. Like Amherst is a small college town. UMass Amherst is not right in the heart of the downtown part of Amherst, but so you could say it's a cross between a more remote location and a smaller college town. It's a self-contained college, so it's got that traditional feel, doesn't blend into the city. In a lot of ways, it kind of feels like its own little city. It's a fairly large campus, acreage-wise, 1,463 acres. And one of its claims to fame, and it's in as hot dispute with who has the tallest library in the world. And they make the claim, and there are one or two others that debate them and say, no, we've got the tallest library in the world. But if you go on the campus right away, you'll see, what is that tall structure? It is a library, and it has millions and millions of volumes in there. It's a very walkable campus. It's not a campus you need a car for. It's a school with a lot of school pride. Not necessarily the robust sports kind of pride you get at a University of Georgia or Ohio State. Sports is a little bit on the mellow side. Of course, it is D1, but not a raucous sports environment. But it just has a lot of pride, school pride that comes from being an excellent institution. Now, one of its most distinctive features is it is a member of the 5 College Consortium. And what that means is there are 5 colleges all in Western Massachusetts. The other 4 are Smith, Hampshire, Mount Holyoke, and Amherst College. So there's UMass Amherst, the flagship, and then there's Amherst College, the private 2,000-person school. And they're all in this Western Massachusetts region. And you can take courses at any of them for free. If you go to any of the 5, you can take up to 2 courses per semester at any of the other schools. And the bus routes run constantly all day taking you around, and all 5 schools are all within 30 miles of each other. You can join clubs at the schools. You can participate in concerts. So it's really great because you get a 5-school experience. If one school doesn't offer a particular course or professor or even a major or minor that you're interested in, you can take those courses at the other school. So I think it's a huge, huge, huge feature. And I'm a massive, big fan of consortiums.
Can you mention those 5 schools again, Mark?
Yeah. So you've got Mount Holyoke, one of the 7 sisters, women's colleges in Hadley. Okay. You've got Smith College, one of the 7 sisters in Northampton. And then you have Hampshire College, and which is having some financial issues, a very unique school, but it looks like they're going to make it. And then you've got Amherst College. You'll be hearing a lot more about Amherst coming up. Of course, we already did the interview with the Director of Career Studies, Emily Griffin, but we also will be having Matt McGann, their Director of Admission, coming on the podcast in the not too distant future. So those are the 5 schools in the consortium, all fantastic schools. You get the small private vibe in the 4 liberal arts colleges, and then you've got the big Amherst College. This is the big beast. Now, some more things to know. All of these schools are in towns that have little distinct feels and flavors to them. So Hadley, where Holyoke is, this is where you'd get some of your familiar retail shops, your Target, your LL Bean, some of your restaurant chains. Even that Mount Holyoke's a little bit removed from that part. That is all in Hadley. Then you've got your downtown Amherst. Okay, that's like your nice little cafes and your bookshops. And then 20 minutes away is Northampton, where Smith is. That's kind of like your funky downtown arts and music shop. And some good restaurants there, because I've been to some of them. I can attest to that. So it's really cool. Now, a little bit more about Amherst. Take it off the 5-school consortium. That's definitely one of its distinctive features. So one of the other things that is very, very unique about UMass Amherst is that the whole school is divided into 10 schools or 10 colleges. Okay? And when you apply directly into a major, and each major is housed in a school or a college. So the entire undergraduate population is like 22,700, but each college or each school has its own advising, its own workshops, and its own acceptance rates that can vary from major to major within the school. Lots of experiential options, research, study abroad, over 550 different options there. All first-year students live together. You've got both an RA and a peer mentor. And, of course, they have rats, Dave. That's why I had to get that in there, man, because I knew I was going to use it today. They got the residential academic program system. And they have classes taught right in dormitory bins. Another thing that's great is the food. Amherst has won all kinds of awards, consistently voted for up there in the conversation year after year, best college food. And they always place really, really high. I got a lot more I want to say, especially about how they do admissions by admitting by major, but I just want to stop, take a breath, see if anything's on your mind so far, Dave.
No, sounds great. I mean, I knew that Amherst was in that consortium. It's a great area of the country there. So take it away.
Okay. So as I mentioned, 22,700 undergrads, close to about 6,000 grad students. So while it's big, it's not like Ohio State, Texas A&M, Arizona State big, is as in 50,000 plus. It's less than half that. 73% of students are in-state, 27% out-of-states. 64% of students get in, so about 2/3 of students get admitted. About 1/3 of students are American students of color, 10.9% Asian, 7.4% Latino, 4.9% Black, 3.2% multiracial, 7.2% international, and 22% of students get the Pell Grant. As you know from listening last week, between 39 and 40% of students are Pell eligible. Now, as far as middle test scores, this is the middle 50%, so this is not counting the bottom quarter or the top quarter. 1220 to 1380 for an SAT, 26 to 31 for an ACT. Average class size is 36. Now, the 25th to 50% GPA is a 3.7 to a 4.2, but it's a little confusing because that's a weighted GPA. So what happens is UMass, all of the Massachusetts schools, actually, they all have to go by the same rules and regulations that the Massachusetts Department of Higher Education, MBHA, cranks out. And basically what they're doing is they're looking at your academic GPA, math, science, English, history, foreign language, and they do include one elective in there. And they're giving you a half a point bonus for honors classes and a full point for AP, IB, or dual enrollment or actual college classes. So that's why you get the higher GPA. So that's the middle range, 3.7 to 4.2. 91% of students return for their sophomore year. The 5-year graduation rate is 79%. And if you wonder why I give the 5-year rate, a lot of times when schools have engineering, that's oftentimes a 5-year path for students, especially if they're going to be doing internships and co-ops. And Mass has a very strong engineering program. It's not a big sorority fraternity school. 8% of women are in sororities. 8% of men are in frats. A little less than 2/3 of students stay on campus, 62%. It is a Common App only school, so they don't take the coalition or any of these other applications. And they only have 2 types of admissions, so they keep it real simple. Common App only, we have early action, and we have regular admissions. That's it. No ED, no ED2, no restricted EA, no EA3, no early assurance. I mean, it's very, very simple. Early action, early November. Usually you find out by Christmas, although they actually preserve the right to go into January in terms of when they notify you. And then January 15th being the deadline for regular admissions. Now, they require one recommendation only. It can be either from a school counselor or from a teacher. Either one. They tend to like school counselor recommendations, but they leave it up to you. But they will allow you to submit up to 2 others. So you can set a maximum of 3, and that can include things like a coach, a boss, an employer. Those can be some of those non-school recs can come in for your 3. But for that one, that has to either be from a core academic teacher or from your school counselor. Now, I want to talk a lot more about this admitting by major, because this is really important to understand how UMass operates. They have a unique system. Any questions or comments so far, Dave? I feel like I'm just going a mile a minute over here.
No. Keep on going.
Keep on humming? I'll keep
on humming.
You give me the green light, man. I'll take it.
No problem.
All right. So let's talk about what it means that they admit by major. So first of all, one of the things it means is that you actually can't be undecided because you have to apply into a school or a college. And those are synonymous, by the way. I say school or college, it's the same thing. The colleges are school within the university, the 10 different schools within the college or university. And so you can't do that. Now you can do what's said. Let's say you say, well, what if I don't know what I want to do? So then you can go what's called an exploratory track is what they call it. So you have to say that you're interested in a particular school, whatever it may be. Let's say it's the Eisenberg School of Management. So you pick that. You're saying, okay, I want to be in there, but I'm not sure exactly whether I want to do like sports management or marketing or accounting or finance. They'll allow you to go into what's called exploratory track, but you've got to pick one of these 10 colleges. So that's interesting. Not a lot of schools have that. And as I mentioned, you have to pick your first choice and your second choice major. You have to do that. So they're admitting you by major. So if you apply and you can't get in your first choice, they'll look at your second choice. And if you don't get in your second choice, then you don't get in at all. So one of the smart things, if you want to get into school, is to not make your second major one of the real competitive ones. Because one thing I love about their office is they're very transparent about their process, extremely transparent. So they will let you know that we have 10 schools and we're admitting by major, but 4 of these 10 schools are competitive or selective. And your chances are going to be a lot, harder getting into them. And we're just going to be upfront with you about that. And so let me talk a little bit about that. Oh, go ahead, Dave.
Well, so quick question. Suppose you don't know what your major is, or suppose you get into a major and you decide you want to switch. How difficult is it to switch once you've already committed?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So let me answer that, but let me answer it after I tell you what the 4 competitive schools are, because it's a little bit different even within the 4 competitive schools, transferring is different for them. So it's not like a one-size-fits-all answer. So by far and away, the hardest school to get into is the School of Nursing. Okay? Remember before I said they have a 64% acceptance rate for the whole UMass Amherst?
Yeah.
Take a guess what the nursing acceptance rate is, Dave.
Probably like 20%?
10.
Whoa, that's an Ivy category. Whoa.
Yeah, they only take 64 kids, 64 spots with a huge wait list.
Wow.
And so, well, you know what? I'll answer your question as I go through it. So for nursing majors, they're the only ones that you cannot transfer in. You either get into nursing, come in right out of the chute, or you don't go into nursing, period.
Yeah.
There is no opportunity to transfer it. Now, their second most competitive major is computer science. Okay. And computer science, it's actually considered an info and computer science school. That's a 25% acceptance rate. So that's competitive. The other really competitive major is engineering, or school of engineering. And then the fourth one is the Eisenberg School of Management, which is the business school. So basically business, engineering, nursing, and computer science. Those are their four super competitive programs. And each one has a different acceptance rate, and different majors have different acceptance rates within there. So the way it works, to answer your question, nursing, you can't transfer it. But let's say you're in computer science, or you're in engineering, or you want to be in it. You don't get in, but you want to go into those. So here's what they do. The first thing is you have to take a bunch of what they call predictive classes. Okay? Similar to how, if you want to go to med school, they look at your biology, your chemistry, your physics, and your math, right?
Right.
Grades. So they have predictive classes, and they see what grades did you get in predictive classes for those disciplines. Secondly, they say we have to have room. You might get straight A's. If we don't have room, you don't get in. So they say you can come and chance it and come here and try to transfer, or maybe you can go somewhere else. But we're not guaranteeing it. But we will say if you're going to get in, you're going to have to really do well in the predictive classes, and we're going to have room. Did that answer the question, Dave, or not?
Well, yes, it does. So bottom line is you got four majors that are pretty competitive, and
not majors. I said majors by accident. They're actually colleges or schools. So like within the School of Engineering, there's all the engineering majors. Within the School of Business, there's like a bunch of majors, right? So
it's quite clear that at least with nursing and probably with engineering and business, if you don't get in from the get-go, it's unlikely you'll be able to transfer.
Not necessarily, because if you come in and you ace ace the predictive classes, then they've got room. They have more spots in those schools. Nursing is a very small program that literally only has 64 spots for the whole state.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah, and so that's how that works. Now, a few other things that may be of interest to students would be they have a very strong honors college. It's called the CHC, the Commonwealth Honors College. And what they do for that is they automatically take your admission application, and you don't have to do anything extra. If you're one of the top, basically the top 10%, really, then you're going to be told that you've been admitted into the Commonwealth. What happens is each individual reader, meaning admissions officer, gets to pick about 10 kids that they've read on their caseload and nominate them for. So it's a holistic process. They're not just looking at test scores and grades. Of course, you're going to have that, but they're also looking at, recommendations and extracurriculars and everything.
Okay.
So that's how that works. And so it's very, very, very hard to be in the top 10%, but they don't make it that hard to get in once you're at the college. Go to the college, prove your GPA when you're there, and you got a good shot at getting in. I want to mention some other majors that are really strong besides, obviously, those four really competitive programs. And these are not all the strong majors, but these are some of the very strong majors. And so just because I don't list it, it doesn't mean, it must be weak. It must be lame. No, okay. Don't take that. Don't make that inference. That's not true. I just want to mention some exceptionally strong programs and draw some attention to them. Architecture, exercise physiology, econometrics, public health, math, food science, microbiology, management. And then they have this really cool interdisciplinary major that like weaves social science and political thought. And you kind of like design your own major. It's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Everybody's automatically considered for financial aid for merit money just off your application. Normally the merit awards are not that big, like most public schools. And most of the money is need-based. So that's UMass Amherst, Dave. What did you learn?
Well, it's part of the consortium. I knew that. It's got some very solid majors. I didn't know nursing was so competitive. It's obviously a great engineering school, and I knew about the business school. And it's a great choice. Interesting. You talked to me about that was one of those where, as an out-of-stater, you have a good chance of getting in relatively because a lot of the Massachusetts is one of those states where it has a population that's declining. So talk to me about how difficult it is to get in as an out-of-stater.
Yeah, so this is really one of these things. You remember me talking before, Dave, about colleges reading by school group? A lot of colleges will read by school group.
Yeah.
Well, UMass doesn't read by school group. They read by major. And so the difficulty of getting in is highly correlated to whether or not you're applying to a major or, quite frankly, to any one of those 4 colleges or schools.
Yeah.
The other 6 are, they're more competitive than the average flagship, but not gruelingly competitive like you see at UC Berkeley or UCLA or UVA or UNC or Georgia Tech or Georgia or UF has become brutally competitive in Florida because of their Bright Futures scholarship. It's not like Michigan is really competitive. Michigan is another one that's really competitive. It's not competitive at that level, but it's more competitive than the average flagship, most definitely. But it really is major specific.
Okay. So to get into the business major, what type of scores are you talking about for an undergraduate?
Well, so one of the things that they say is they look at all of their averages, right? So I kind of gave you the range before. I gave you like the 21 through the 36 on the ACT and the 1220 to the 1380, and then the average GPA being a 3.7 to a 4.2 with their weighting system. So you have to be above, like on the higher end of all that numbers wise, just to be considered for the more competitive programs. And then they are also going to look at the recommendations, and they look at everything, including the school you're coming from. They take that in consideration as well. Okay, so basically the numbers will knock you out if you're not on the higher end of the numbers, but just because you don't have the numbers, but having the numbers doesn't automatically put you in.
Okay, that makes sense. Good. Solid school. Great review, Mark.
Yeah, one thing I didn't say, $54,000 out of state cost of attendance, $34,000 in state. That's all in, literally everything. And that's of course not counting merit money. So with merit money, that can come down. One thing I have been pleased with, I'll say, Dave, is I have been pleased with my out-of-state students getting merit money from them. So it's not good. They don't just keep the merit money just for the in-state students. So I've had out-of-state students, get some really nice awards from them. So it's good. Don't get intimidated by that price point if that's something you can't do. Of course, remember, when we talk money, I tell my students this when my parents are freaking out over money. I say, you know what? A student can bring 10 grand to the table. And here's how. If they take the federal direct student loan out, it's an average of about $6,700 a year. That will result in a payment for them of right now's interest rates, about $250 to $260 a month for 10 years. If you're out making money, that should be something that's manageable. And some parents choose, once they're done paying for their kids' education, they're like, you know what? I'll split it in half. You do $125 a month, I'll do $125. And some say, you know what? I don't want you to have any debt. You did well, you worked hard. I'm not paying tuition anymore. I'll pick it up. But anyway, you do that, and then you work, and the student can easily make $2,500 a year during the school year working, and then they can easily make another $800 to $1,000 over the summer. So I'm a believer in having your kids have skin in the game, and there's a research that shows they have higher GPAs when they have skin in the game. So by the time your kid does their contribution, say 10 grand, and then maybe you get some merit money, these numbers of 34 and 54 are not 34 and 54 in reality.
Yeah, and that's a good point to make, because if you're 54 all in, but you can get 10 grand in merit money, and your child can also bring another 10 grand to the table, you're looking at the 30s, and that's well in line with a very good value public education. And a direct comparison. I mean, I'm in the Northeast now. I have a lot of my colleagues whose kids go to NYU. They tend to like NYU. I don't see NYU as being a particularly more competitive college than UMass Amherst, but I can tell you that all these parents are paying 75 grand plus for NYU. So, and many times, I've been asked, well, what alternative do I have? And I said, well, if you looked around, there are many colleges that are of that caliber that are considerably cheaper. And I think UMass Amherst is a very good comparison with, for example, an NYU.
Yeah, they have really strong faculty. And I can't say this enough. I know you guys probably get tired of me hearing this. I'm such a fan of honors colleges.
Yeah.
I won't get into all of it now because we've gone a while, but you just get so many really good perks. And it is like taking a little mini private school out of it in terms of the highest achievers. You can all live together, lots of perks, and you can get a great education at these flagships. I'm telling you, I'm incredibly impressed with the education Joy's getting at UGA, and I got to see what Karis got at Davidson. And I tell you, these flagships, they're a real bang for your buck, and especially if you can be in small classes with them. So,
yes.
UMass Amherst, I'm a fan.
Yes, I agree.
And the NBA may come back.
Oh, really?
You know that? The NBA, man, they're talking about doing a shortened season.
Oh, yeah, they are. But, they have plans of it's going to be out of Las Vegas and Orlando.
I don't care where it is. It's better than COVID 24/7 and old movies.
I agree.
And old basketball and CNBC.
Well, I could also say NASCAR is coming on this weekend.
Okay, Dave, end the podcast, man. We're done. That's the way you can get rid of me. Say the word NASCAR. Over. I'm out.
And that's our show. A big thank you to you, our listeners, for tuning in this week. Your College Bound Kid is produced by Dave Visaya of podcastengineers.com. If you find this podcast helpful, it would help us tremendously if you would subscribe and write us a review on your favorite podcast listening station. And please be sure to click the share button and send this to someone you know that can really use this information. The amazing music that you hear is by Victor Allen Weeks. Our image editor is Tauha Khan. Webmaster is Stallianos Dimitru. And marketing designs are by Kimberly Blass. And if you want to get a copy of the book, 171 Answers to the Most Asked College Admissions Questions, you can go right to 171answers.com. And if you want to have a college coaching session with Mark, you can send him a text to area code 404-664-4340. And if you have a question or a few questions that you would like to ask us, and we'll include them on the show, you can just email us at questions@yourcollegeboundkid.com. Every week, we'll take one question and include it in the episode. We don't like your questions. We love your questions. So send them our way. And by the way, check out our website, yourcollegeboundkid.com. Again, we thank you for tuning in, and we look forward to meeting with you again next week.